There is a type of mirror that does not show what is in front of it. It shows what has already looked back. Jiyeon restores antique objects for a living. She has handled ceramics older than most countries, bronzes that have been buried and dug up twice. When she bought a small circular mirror at an Insadong auction, the dealer said 2 words, "Enjoy it." It sounded less like a pleasantry than an instruction with conditions she didn't yet understand. She brought it home. She left it covered. That night, she dreamed of still water seen from below. The next morning, she unwrapped it in full daylight. Her reflection was facing the wrong direction. This is what Jiyeon discovered about the mirror, about the woman who last kept it uncovered, and about what the reflection does when you tell it you will not follow where it went. The auction was small and held in the back room of an Insadong building that smelled of old lacquer and the particular mustiness of objects kept too long in closed spaces. Jiyeon arrived 20 minutes early and walked the tables before the bidding started. Her standard practice, the way she read a room before committing to anything. Most of what was laid out was furniture, a tansu chest with its original hardware, a set of low writing tables with cracked lacquer she could already see herself repairing, a pair of late Joseon-era hat stands that would clean up well. She photographed each piece with her phone and made notes in the small book she kept in her jacket pocket. The mirror was on the last table, near the back wall. It was bronze, circular, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, with a cast design on the reverse side that she recognized as late Joseon, a stylized crane motif within a border of clouds. The face of the mirror was dark with age, the reflective surface occluded by oxidation that had turned it the color of a winter sky. The wooden stand that held it was not original, but had been made with care. Someone had kept this object deliberately. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. She bid on it twice and won at a price that was lower than she expected. The dealer who processed her payment was an elderly man with careful hands and thick-framed glasses. He wrapped the mirror in cloth and wrote her receipt without speaking. When she handed him the cash and he handed her the wrapped piece, she noticed he did not look at her face. He looked at the mirror and then at the receipt and then at a point slightly past her left shoulder. "Enjoy it," he said. The phrase sounded, in his mouth, less like a pleasantry than a directive with conditions she didn't yet understand. She carried it home on the subway, the wrapped mirror across her knees, and thought about the cleaning work it would need. Her apartment in Mapo-gu was also her studio, a single large room with good northern light, a long work table along one wall, shelves of tools and solvents and reference books along another. She set the mirror on the work table, still wrapped, and made rice, and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking at her phone. She had 3 jobs in progress. The mirror was personal interest, not commission. She would get to it on the weekend. That evening, around 9, she washed her hands at the bathroom sink. The bathroom doorway opened directly onto the studio, and from the sink she had a partial view of the work table in the room behind her. The mirror was still wrapped. She had not unwrapped it yet. She looked up at the bathroom mirror. Her own face looked back at her, tired, a little pale from the fluorescent light. Her hair still tucked behind one ear from the day. Ordinary. Then, in the bathroom mirror's reflection of the studio doorway behind her, she caught the work table and the mirror, which was still wrapped in cloth, but from which a narrow strip of the reflective bronze surface was visible where the cloth had shifted. In that narrow strip she saw herself, not as she was standing. She was at the sink, turned toward the tap, her weight on her left foot. But the figure in that strip of bronze was standing differently, weight forward, head very slightly tilted, facing in a direction she was not facing, the same clothes, the same hair, just wrong. She turned around quickly. The studio was empty. The cloth had shifted on the mirror, but no one had touched it. She crossed the room and pressed the cloth back into place and stood with her hand on it for a moment. She left it on the work table. She went to bed at 10:30 and lay in the dark with the feeling that she was a half-second behind herself, like someone walking in her footsteps close enough that their tread overlapped with hers, and she could not quite feel where she ended, and the echo began. She told herself it was the fluorescent light, the angle, fatigue. By the time she fell asleep, she had almost convinced herself. She unwrapped the mirror on Saturday morning, in full daylight. This was a conscious choice. She set the studio lights to their brightest setting and opened the blinds all the way and made coffee first and drank half of it before she touched the cloth. She was treating it like any other piece, methodically, professionally, in conditions designed to eliminate ambiguity. She lifted the cloth and folded it and set it aside. The mirror's surface was as she had assessed it at the auction. Oxidized bronze, the reflective quality, almost entirely obscured by the dark patina of age. She could see herself in it only dimly, a shape rather than a face, a presence rather than a detail. She told herself this was exactly what you would expect from a bronze mirror in this condition, and that what she had seen Thursday night was an effect of the partial exposure. The bathroom light, the narrow strip of reflective surface catching the room at an angle that distorted what it showed. She spent the afternoon carefully cleaning a section near the mirror's edge, using a soft cloth and a diluted solution appropriate for bronze. The metal responded well. The patina lifted gradually to reveal the cast surface beneath. She made notes. She photographed her progress. She worked until the light outside the windows had gone orange and then amber and then gone entirely. She covered the mirror again before she went to bed. This was also a conscious choice, though she did not examine it. The second night, she dreamed of water, not drowning. She needed to be precise about this when she thought about it afterward, because drowning implied distress, and this was not that. It was the stillness just before immersion. The surface of water viewed from below, seen through a few centimeters of depth, the light coming through in the particular scattered way it came through when the water was absolutely calm, and you were looking up at the world from underneath it. She woke at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark and thought about the dream with the detached attention of someone who was used to processing things carefully. The third night, the dream was the same. The fourth night, she left the mirror uncovered when she went to bed. She did not know why she did this. She got up, crossed the studio, lifted the cloth from the frame, and went back to bed. She fell asleep looking at the dim bronze oval from across the room, and the dream did not come. But in the morning, standing at the work table with her coffee, she looked at the mirror's surface, and her reflection looked back, and her hands in the reflection were not where her hands were in the room. In the mirror, her hands were at her sides, relaxed, open. In the room, they were wrapped around her coffee cup. She looked between her actual hands and the mirror's version of her hands for a long moment. Then she covered the mirror and went to work. Her colleague Hyerim came by on Friday evening to drop off reference photographs for a shared job. She was 32, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who noticed things and usually said so. She came in, set the photographs on the table, looked around the studio the way she always did. Her gaze passed over the covered mirror. She went pale, not dramatically, just a visible draining of the color from her face, the way a person went pale when they stood up too quickly. She looked at the covered cloth for about 3 seconds. "Is that new?" she asked. "An acquisition. I'm restoring it." Hyerim looked at the cloth a moment longer. "Can I look at it?" Jiyeon hesitated. "It's covered while I'm working on the patina." "Right." Hyerim looked away, back at the reference photographs. "Actually, "Do you want to sell it when you're done? I've been looking for something like that." She said it casually, but her voice was slightly flatter than usual, the tone of someone filling space with words. Then, almost immediately, "Never mind, I don't have room." She picked up her bag. "I should go. Early start tomorrow." She left without finishing her tea. Jiyeon stood in the studio after the door closed and looked at the covered mirror for a long time. Whatever Hyerim had seen, or had not quite seen, in that brief glance at the covered cloth, she had not been able to name it. But it had been enough to make her leave. The auction house's provenance records were kept in a shared digital folder that Jiyeon had access to as a registered restorer. She had used it many times for research. It was the standard starting point when a piece arrived without documentation. She opened it on a Sunday morning at her kitchen table with coffee and her notebook and the particular focused calm of someone beginning a task they expected to find straightforward. The mirror's lot record was 3 pages. She read it slowly. The piece had come from an estate sale in 2021. The seller was listed as an executor of the Park family estate, Gyeonggi-do, Yangpyeong County. The family had owned the property, a rural house with farmland, for at least 4 generations, and had liquidated the contents following the death of the last remaining family member. She scrolled to the next page. The deceased was named Park Sun-hee, age at death 28. Jiyeon set down her coffee. She was 28. She read on. Cause of death, accidental drowning. Location, a reservoir approximately 3 kilometers from the family property, used historically for agricultural irrigation. The death had occurred in October 2020. The estate had been settled the following year, and the contents sold through several auction houses, of which the Insadong house was one. The 3rd page contained the household inventory as reported by the executor, a room-by-room list of items. The mirror was listed under the main room with a note attached. The note was brief, transcribed from what the executor identified as a household record book kept by the family, apparently in the grandmother's handwriting. The transcription read, "Bronze mirror, Joseon period, family provenance unknown. Kept covered when not in use. Covering is important. The mirror is not dangerous, but it requires a custodian who understands it. It has always been kept covered except for the one who it recognizes, who may use it freely. The recognized one will know." Below this, in the executor's own notation, last custodian Park Sun-hee uncovered item approximately 1 year prior to her death. No further household notes. Jiyeon read the notation twice. She closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a while without opening it again. She spent the afternoon looking for information about Park Sun-hee. There was not much. A social media profile that had not been updated since 2019. A couple of tagged photographs in which a young woman appeared at the edge of groups, slightly removed from the center of things. Dark hair, a specific quality of self-containment in the way she stood, even in casual photographs. Not unfriendly, just inward. In the most recent photograph, she was standing near what looked like a reservoir. Flat gray water behind her, a concrete embankment, a line of bare trees. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking at the water. Jiyeon sat with her laptop for a long time. She thought about the notation, the one who it recognizes, who may use it freely. She thought about Sun-hee uncovering the mirror 1 year before her death. And she thought about herself covering and uncovering it over the past week with a compulsion she could not entirely account for. She thought about the dreams of still water viewed from below. And she thought about the expression she had seen on her own face in the reflection, the particular stillness, the mouth slightly open, the eyes fixed below the frame. She had recognized it before she understood it. She knew now why. It was the face in the last moment before the surface closed. She went to the studio and stood in front of the covered mirror with her arms crossed, not looking at it, just being in the room with it. The cloth was dark and unmoving. The studio was quiet. Sunhee had been 28. She was 28. She did not know yet whether that was a coincidence or a pattern. But she was a restorer by trade, which meant she had spent her working life learning to read what objects carried, and this object was telling her something she was not finished hearing. She was not ready to look directly, not yet, but she was getting there. She kept it covered for 3 days, not because she was afraid, or not only because of that. She needed time to think clearly, and she had learned over years of restoration work that the most useful thing you could do before engaging with a difficult object was to leave it alone and let your mind settle around the fact of it. Objects did not change while you were not looking. The question was whether you had changed enough to look at them honestly. On the third night, she made a decision that was really just the acknowledgement of a decision she had already made. She would sit in front of it on Wednesday morning, in daylight, without covering it first, and she would stay until she understood what it was showing her. Wednesday arrived with the particular clear light of a late autumn morning in Seoul. Cold outside, the sky a pale, definite blue, the studio lit with the kind of light that made everything look exactly as it was. She made coffee. She drank it standing by the window and watched a delivery truck back slowly down the street below. She washed the cup. She dried it. Then she went to the work table and removed the cloth from the mirror and set the cloth on the shelf and pulled her low stool in front of the mirror and sat down with both hands flat on her thighs and looked. For the first 30 seconds she saw herself, clearly and ordinarily, her face, her expression, her posture, the studio behind her, the northern light, the shelf of tools, everything accounted for. Then, gradually, the reflection shifted. It was not a sudden change. It was more like the way a face resolved from a blurred photograph as the focus adjusted. Something that had always been there becoming visible by degrees. The bone structure remained hers. The eyes remained hers. But the face in the glass was older and still and held a quality she had not seen before in her own reflection. She had spent years looking at objects and assessing them, reading the weight of what they carried. She looked at this face the same way. It was not dead. That was important. She did not want to be imprecise about this. It was not the face of a corpse or a ghost in the conventional sense. It was the face of something completed. A person who had been to a place and come back through it to a stillness on the other side. The specific piece, she thought, of someone who was no longer afraid of a thing they had once been afraid of. She did not look away. She sat with her hands flat on her thighs and her breathing even, and she let the face in the glass be what it was without pulling back from it, or reframing it, or trying to make it mean something more. Manageable. Then she spoke. She said it quietly, the way she said things she meant entirely. I know what happened to you. I'm not going to let it happen to me. She did not know exactly what she meant by you, whether it was the mirror, or the face in the mirror, or Park Sun-hee, or some version of herself she was speaking to across a distance she could not measure. She said it anyway. It was the truest sentence she had. The reflection did not change. The face remained as it was, older, still, with that specific completed piece. The studio behind it remained the studio. Then, after a long moment in which the room was completely silent and the morning light held everything in its pale blue clarity, the reflection blinked once. The way a person blinked when they had heard something they needed to register. Jiyeon sat in front of the mirror for another full minute without moving. Then she reached out, and with the same deliberate care she brought to every object she had ever restored, She laid the cloth back over the mirror's face. She stood up. Her hands were entirely steady. She went to make another cup of coffee and stood by the window and watched the street and understood, with the calm certainty of someone who had just finished a difficult piece of work, that the conversation was over. She did not restore the mirror. This was the first decision, and it was not a difficult one. Restoration meant returning an object to a state it had been in before, stripping back what time had done, recovering the original surface. But the original surface of this mirror was not something she wanted to recover. The oxidized patina that obscured its reflection was not damage. It was, she understood now, a form of management. The covering was doing something useful, and she was going to leave it doing that. She spent a Saturday morning wrapping the mirror properly, not in the casual cloth she had been using during the week, but in a length of dark cotton she cut and folded specifically for the purpose. She wrapped it the way she wrapped the most fragile pieces in her storage room, in overlapping layers, secured without tape, tight enough to hold, but not so tight it put pressure on the surface. She did it carefully and without hurry. She carried it to the storage room at the back of the apartment, a narrow room she used for pieces in transit, tools she did not need often, reference books she had stopped consulting. She cleared a space on the lower shelf at the back, away from the window, not hidden, not pushed behind other things, set down properly in a place where it could be found if it needed to be found, and where it was unlikely to be disturbed by accident. She stood back and looked at it, a wrapped rectangle, anonymous among other wrapped objects, storing whatever it stored. She turned off the light and closed the door. She took the train to Yangpyeong on a Sunday. The journey was an hour and a half from Seoul Station. She sat by the window and watched the city give way to the middle ground of the metropolitan fringe, and then to the wider, slower landscape of the countryside. Brown fields in November, low hills, the particular bleached quality of the Korean countryside in late autumn, when the color had finished leaving and what remained was clean and spare. She had looked up the reservoir on a map. It was a 30-minute walk from the nearest bus stop. She walked it without hurrying, along a road that ran between harvested paddies, the surface of the reservoir appearing first as a line of flat gray between the tree line and the sky. At the embankment she stopped. The water was still. It was the kind of still she had been dreaming about, flat, giving nothing back, the sky reflected in it as a lighter version of itself. She looked at it for a while without speaking. She was not afraid of it. That was something she noted and registered. She had changed her route to work specifically to avoid the Han River bridges, a decision she had made quietly, without discussion, as if her body had made it before her mind caught up. But standing here at the reservoir's edge, she felt no pull, no particular charge. It was just water, just a place something had happened. She said the name, Park Sun-hee. She said it quietly. Once, the way she said things, she meant entirely. Not a prayer exactly, not an apology. An acknowledgement, a name said aloud, by someone who knew whose name it was and why it mattered to say it, in the place where it had last applied. She stood for another minute. A bird moved across the water's surface somewhere to her left. The air was cold and smelled of mud and dry grass. Then she turned and walked back to the bus stop and took the train home. The route to work was the change that stayed. She did not examine it, the way you did not examine certain decisions that had already been made correctly. It added 4 minutes. It took her through a residential street she had not used before, past a bakery that opened early, and a small park where older people walked slowly in the mornings. The mirror stayed in the storage room. She did not take on another auction that season. She knew its name. She knew what it carried. She had looked at it directly and spoken to it and it had answered her, and she had covered it again with care. That was the whole of her responsibility, and she had met it. She went on with her work. She did not think about the reservoir. She did not think about Park Sun-hee every day. Only sometimes, the way you thought occasionally about a person you had learnt about and then had to let be what they were. Someone who had held something before her and had not known to speak first. She knew now. That was enough. 3 years ago, something began calling people by their full name in a small barrio in the Philippines. Always after dark. Always from just beyond the tree line. Everyone who lived there knew the rule. You do not answer. One man answered. He lost 2 hours and came back different. Rowena heard her own name on her first night home. Her grandmother's voice came through the wall immediately. Huwag sumagot. Do not answer. What Rowena did next was not what anyone in that barrio expected. She went toward it. Not to answer. To explain. This is her account. Everything. The names called from the bamboo grove, the old forest cleared without consultation, the healer who died without an apprentice, and what the entity said when someone finally spoke to it without fear is exactly as she described it to me. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.